Devo, the multifaceted punk band known for their performance art and innovative music, have continued to reinvent themselves through different mediums and expressions, such as multimedia performance art, music videos, and 3D concerts. The history of Devo starts in the 1970s in Akron, Ohio. At the time, Jared Casale, who was a student at Kent State, organizing for the Students of Democratic Society against the Vietnam War. On May 4th, 1970, Casale witnessed the Kent State shootings where the National Guard fired upon the student uprising, killing 4 students and injuring 9 others. Casale personally knew 2 of the students who were gunned down in this tragic massacre, Allison Krause and Jeffrey Miller. Over the next 2 years, Casale was able to use his grief and turn that into a personal project that later turned into devolution, society falling apart rather than progressing. While conceiving of this concept, Casale then met Mark Mothersbaugh, a part-time student taking art classes at Kent. The 2 men then conceived of an art movement to advance their performance art into music. Their first action, abbreviating devolution to Divo. Fast forward to 1977, after playing many successful gigs at the likes of CBGB's, Max's Kansas City, and the Whiskey A Go-Go, Iggy Pop gave Devo's demo tape to Neil Young, who then passed their tape along to David Bowie.
Devo. Devo, are you a man?
Yeah, Devo.
Devo.
Who was able to get Devo in touch with Brian Eno, who was then able to produce their classic Question, Are We Not Men? Answer, We Are Devo in 1978. That is the history most fans of Devo are familiar with. However, an equally interesting part of their history is when Johnny Rotten almost joined Devo, and Devo's later influence on Rotten's later band, Public Image Limited. In January of 1978, after a contentious US tour, the Sex Pistols played their final show in San Francisco at the Winterland Ballroom. Tensions were already high. Sid Vicious was addicted to heroin and wasn't plugged in for half of his set. Steve Jones had a cold, and Johnny Rotten wasn't talking to his bandmates. The set concluded with a cover of the Stooges' No Fun, with Johnny Rotten having a meltdown afterward, asking the crowd, ever feel like you've been cheated before?
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated? Good night.
Meanwhile, Jared Casale, the main lyricist, and the rest of Devo were in California to play at the Santa Monica Civic Theater for New Year's Eve. Then they were to meet up with executives at Warner Brothers to discuss a potential record deal. While in California, the Mabuhay Gardens, which Devo had previously played at in the summer of 1977, requested that they play a gig there again. During their time off between negotiating at Warner Brothers and playing at the Mabuhay Gardens in San Francisco, Devo was able to attend the Sex Pistols' final show at the Winterland Ballroom. Afterwards, Devo would soon learn that they were sharing the same hotel as the Sex Pistols, the Miyaka Hotel, with Jared Casale even seeing Sid Vicious walk through a plate glass window and having to go to the hospital for injuries because of it. The band even got to meet and talk to Johnny Rotten after the fateful show. Afterwards, the band finished recording Question, Are We Not Men? Answer, We Are Devo, their debut album, and headed back to Akron, Ohio. In March of that same year, there was a blizzard. At that same time, Richard Branson, head of Virgin Records, was in talks with Devo to make Virgin the group's European label, and invited them to a visit to Jamaica, where he was staying to meet in person. When they got to Kingston, Jamaica, bandmates Mark Mothersbaugh and Bob Casale met Branson at their hotel along with some of Branson's other associates. Richard Branson and a bunch of guys, South Africans that he'd started Virgin with, were sitting on the sofa, and they were rolling these gigantic joints, Mothersbaugh recalled. I'd never seen that much marijuana before. In Akron, it was always 3/4 oregano anyhow by the time it got to you. So he rolled these joints and they're passing them around. Everybody is taking hits off these giant joints. And then I never was a smoker, but I gave it a try. I took a couple puffs and then Bob Casale, who was a smoker, so he's just doing big hits. As the pair were getting ridiculously high on Branson's high-quality marijuana, something that the two had never experienced before, that's when Branson changed the course of the conversation by mentioning the Sex Pistols' recent breakup, causing Mothersbaugh to then relay his story of watching the band break up firsthand. At this point, I'm just like blabbling away, Mothersbaugh admitted, and Branson, well, he goes, well, I'll tell you why you're here. I've got reporters from Melody Maker, Sounds, and New Music Express, the 3 English papers. They're all in the hotel right now, and Johnny Rotten, well, he's here. And Johnny Rotten wants to join Devo. If you want, we can go down to the beach right now and make an announcement, and sign something on the beach right now, and Johnny Rotten can join Devo. Due to the effects of the weed, Bob Casale just started to laugh and thought the offer was a joke, while his partner, Mothersbaugh, who had never smoked as much weed as he had in that meeting in his entire life, was in disbelief and started to feel an onset of paranoia. I remember at that point, all of a sudden I hit this break, the Devo frontman recalled. And I'm looking at Richard, and he's staring intently at me with this crazed look on his face. Because even to him, it must have sounded crazy in a way to say that. And he's smiling really wide, and I'm like, oh my god, his teeth are protruding like a brain-eating ape. I started stuttering and sputtering, Mothersbaugh continued, and Bob is totally smashed. He doesn't even have anything to say about anything, he's just so high. Either way, it was not what Richard Branson was expecting, so Mothersbaugh needed to compose himself and explain to Branson why he thought this was a bad idea. We love the band, and I love Johnny Rotten. He's so amazing, the singer explained. But Divo, we're different, and we have our own thing. But we love them, and that's actually really complimentary that he would even think about joining Divo. Branson and Mothersbaugh then proceeded to argue after Branson realized he was not going to get his way. Reportedly, he got very depressed at this no-go, then left the meeting to inform the Melody Maker, New Musical Express, and Rotten about Devo's rejection. Apparently, this rejection soured the relationship between the group, Richard Branson, and by extension, Virgin Records. They thought they were going to do this big, crazy stunt, the singer explained. I was not up for that at all, and I just remember thinking, oh shit, does that mean we don't have any place to stay now? Because I don't have any money. I can't even afford a ticket back. Afterwards, both Casale and Mothersbaugh stayed in Kingston with Branson to avoid the storm in Akron. Now this might come out of left field until you realize a crucial element of the Pistols' story with EMI. By the end of 1976, the Pistols were becoming huge, touring all over the UK, and had just finished their first big hit, Anarchy in the UK. However, due to their infamy as punk rockers and bringing combative attitude, at the time, punk was seen as a passing fad and wasn't really seen as real music despite other American bands such as the Ramones, who were able to release their first record in April of 1976 through a major label subsidiary known as Sire Records. Other UK bands at the time like The Damned or the Buzzcocks went the independent route for their distribution methods. Regardless, McLaren was convinced the Pistols could be huge, and was unwavering in his quest for a major label to pick them up. Enter EMI. After wave of overwhelming success with the Pistols, McLaren somehow convinced executives at EMI, the same label who had produced for the Beatles 10 years earlier, to produce for the Pistols. This relationship between the Pistols and EMI was never going to last though. EMI were known for controlling and guiding artists towards success, and found the Pistols with their controversy and unpredictability to be massive headaches for them. And indeed it was, as the relationship only lasted for 3 months, following the Bill Grundy incident on live television. Shortly afterwards, the band signed with record label A&M outside of Buckingham Palace. At the end of the ceremony, the band, along with the new bassist Sid Vicious, made their way to the label office, where Vicious cut his leg open on a toilet bowl. This relationship finally came to an end 6 days after the initial signing, when a close friend of Rotten threatened the life of an A&M executive. A&M quickly terminated their contract between the group. It was at this point that McLaren approached Richard Branson to sign the band to Virgin Records, which Branson agreed to. By signing Devo to his record label, Branson would have effectively owned the rights to both Devo and the Sex Pistols' catalog of music at this point. However, this story continues, as the connection to Divo and John Lydon don't just stop there, as Mike Mothersbaugh could have influenced Lydon towards his corporate aesthetic through his next project, Public Image Limited. At least according to some stories, since everyone in the room was high and laughing manically after Branson proposed his plan. During the break between the laughter, instead of agreeing to the plan, Mothersbaugh countered with his own plan of helping Lydon figure out his next project. We just started laughing at them until tears were coming out of our eyes and we were choking, and we're like, "It's not you, Richard. We're not laughing at you. We love Johnny Rotten, that's great. But what if we just help him start a band?" In fact, there might be some amount of truth to this, as there is a complete and total tonal shift between Lydon's Sex Pistols' sarcastic tone and PIL's new wavy kind of tone afterwards. Not to mention, Lydon's corporate critique and PIL does sort of feel like it came right out of Akron alongside Devo itself. Finally, in Apocalypse Jukebox, The End of the World in American Popular Music, Edward Whitelock relates an anecdote from Jade Dillinger and David Geffel's We Are Devo, Are We Not Men? The story concerns a conversation between Mothersbaugh and Johnny Rotten. Shortly after the breakup of the Sex Pistols, Mothersbaugh suggested that Rotten lose the safety pins and shredded shirts and adopt a corporate approach, that screwing with convention was edgier than spitting at it. Perhaps in response, Rotten dropped his stage name and John Lydon formed Public Image Limited, defining the post-punk aesthetic in the process. Exactly how much credit Mothersbaugh should get for PIL is beside the point, which is that over-orthodox thinking had already become second nature for Mothersbaugh and Casale. If the meeting between Mothersbaugh and Branson had gone differently, we might have had an alternate Divo with Johnny Rotten as its frontman, and it might have been an interesting sight to see. However, I'm kinda glad things turned out the way they did. Devo and PIL respectively had pushed the new wave sound towards the mainstream, and are both still putting out great hits almost 50 years after they both started is a great accomplishment for both, as very few bands can say they've done the same. But who cares what I think? What do you think of this story? Do you think Devo would be better or worse if Johnny Rotten had been their frontman? Why or why not? Discuss it in the comment section below. I'd love to see what others think about this story. As always, please leave a like and subscribe if you like this story. Catch you next time on KINOSPIRACY.